All right, I'm going to talk a little bit about fabric for quilts. I've got a piece of muslin here that I'm going to show you how you can, if you've got a crooked edge and you need to make sure you've got a straight of grain on your fabric, you can clip the selvage edge, which is either side of the fabric, and you can pull it and it'll straighten because it'll tear evenly on the same thread all the way across the fabric, and you'll end up with a torn piece that may or may not be crooked. And then we'll talk about the grain of the fabric is the way the fabric's woven. It's woven across the fabric with threads and lengthwise of the fabric with threads. And on each edge, you have a selvage edge, which is a woven edge that will not ravel out. And you need to trim that off before you use your fabric in making pieces for your quilt, because it will shrink differently than the rest of the fabric after the quilt is washed. So then it would shrink unevenly and not be very attractive. So that's why I've got that piece of muslin there to show you that. There's a drawing over here that shows the selvage on each side of the fabric, the crosswise grain from selvage to selvage, the lengthwise grain from cut edge to cut edge, and there's a line on there for true bias, which is 45 degrees, or a random bias, which can be anything, 60 degrees, or anything else that you need for your quilt. So that just helps us to know how to lay our fabric out, make sure it's straight before we start cutting. You can actually straighten the grain on a piece of fabric if it's crooked. You can line up the selvages and pin it in place and spray it with starch or just water and get it a little damp, and then straighten it with your hand from the selvage over and pin it in place and let it dry, and it'll straighten the grain of the fabric out. So that's helpful if you get a really crooked piece of fabric. So most quilters like 100% cotton for their quilts because it's easy to sew. It's not too stretchy or too tight, and it takes a crease really well. You should always purchase as good a quality fabric as you can afford, which is not as inexpensive as it used to be. But don't get a fabric that feels really too loosely woven or really stiff with a lot of sizing and things like that in it. And when you take it home, there are things you can do to prepare your fabric for quilting. And some people love to wash their quilt fabric right away. When they get it out of the bag, they throw it in the washer and the dryer, and they press it, and then they put it on the shelf. And then others don't do that at all. So just make sure when you make a quilt that you either wash all of your fabric or none of your fabric, and then when you wash it, it should shrink evenly. Um, the diagonal of the fabric is the most stretchy part of the fabric. Let me see if I can show you that. So when you fold it on the diagonal, and you've got this fold here, you can see that it stretches quite a bit. When you use the crosswise grain, it stretches some, but not as much as the bias. And then the lengthwise grain is pretty taut. It doesn't stretch hardly at all. When this makes the most difference is when you cut triangles, because you're going to have two edges that are not going to be straight of grain. And so you have to handle triangles pretty easily and make sure you don't stretch them out of shape when you're getting ready to use them in your quilt. You have a right and a wrong side to most fabrics. A printed fabric will look different on the back side than it will on the front side. So you've got the front side, and there's the back side. It's much paler in color. So you can usually tell pretty easily which is the right and the wrong side of a printed fabric. If you have a homespun, which is yarn dyed, which means that all the threads are dyed and then they're woven together, it looks the same on both sides, and it's much more loosely woven than a standard print. If you've got a batik, it's much more tightly woven. It also looks the same on both sides. You don't have to worry about what's the front and what's the back. So that makes that really nice. There are some new processes that they're using to print fabrics now, and that's digital printing. So be aware when you buy fabric, whether it's digitally printed or the standard printing methods of the day. These, you need to use a ballpoint needle to make sure that the needle doesn't hit a thread and move it, because the print is only on the surface and you'll get a white mark where the fabric has crossed another thread. One thread's crossed another thread, the needle hits it, moves it out of place, and there's no ink on that part of the thread, and so you'll see a white place. So just be aware of these things when you're picking out which fabrics you're going to sew. We also have things like panels that are pre-printed with designs, and you can cut them apart and put sashing around them, or like this one already has the sashing printed. This would make a really cute little boy's quilt, and all you would have to do is just do some quilting stitches on it. You can outline quilt it or all over quilt it, and there are many panels that you can get to make quilts where you don't have to do a lot of piecing. So those are really handy to have. This one already looks like quilt blocks, and you could just free motion quilt on it or walking foot quilt on it, and it will give you a lot of instant gratification because you haven't had to piece a lot of blocks. So there's that. And when you talk about how much fabric to buy for a quilt, uh, most of the patterns give you exactly the yardage you need for each color used in the quilt design, and you can find that generally on the back cover of a pattern. Um, if you don't have a reason to buy that piece of fabric, but it's just calling your name, you can buy anywhere from a quarter of a yard to a yard. Uh, they have things like fat quarters that you can buy. A regular quarter yard cut is 9 inches by the width of the fabric, which is usually about 44 inches. But a fat quarter is cut 18 by 22 inches, which is a more square piece of fabric, and you can get bigger pieces out of it than a standard quarter-inch cut, quarter yard cut. So they have fat quarters, fat eighths, jelly rolls, which are 2.5-inch strips. They usually have about 40 strips in each roll. These are called honey buns because they're shorter. They're 1.5 inches. And you have all kinds of things like these are 6-inch squares that are folded. You have layer cakes, which are 10-inch squares, and charm packs, which are 5-inch squares. So you can virtually make a quilt almost without cutting any pieces. Just pick your design. They have patterns especially made for all of those pre-cut sizes. Um, if you want to stockpile fabric for backings, you need to probably buy 6 yards or more for a bed quilt. If you're just doing a lap quilt or a wall quilt, 3 yards is probably plenty. Um, uh, we buy fabric just because it calls out to us and we love it so much. Uh, there are special soaps for quilters for their quilts. There's one called Orvis Paste that you can buy at livestock supply stores because it's used on animals. It's so mild that you can use it on your quilts. And they now have some specialized quilters soaps that help remove stains from old quilts and keep your quilts in good condition. Um, some quilts, some fabrics bleed more than others. So when you wash your quilts, we recommend that you use special quilt soaps or color catchers. They look like a dryer sheet, but you throw them in the wash with your quilt, 3 or 4 of them, and they will collect all the loose dye that gets into your wash water. Instead of letting it move to another part of the quilt and grab onto that, those color catchers catch all those loose dyes and keep the bleeding from occurring or help it to be less than it would have been. Um, there's lots of information you can get about all different kinds of fabrics and the ways to treat them, but those are sort of your basics. And I hope that helps with general knowledge to enable you to start quilting or keep quilting.